probably about 7 minutes or so, is to give a profile of really the youth of concern, and that is the youth who are in the juvenile justice system. Many of you have probably seen this graphic before. This is a simple, actually, graphic that displays what we mean when we say the juvenile justice system. As you know, it is very complex. There are at least 50 plus systems in this country, and this is really kind of meant to try to capture some of those areas. I'm going to primarily talk about youth who are in the court system, in our probation system, and primarily those in custody, because those are who, ironically, we know probably the most about. The data sources I'll be really turning to for some of this information are listed on this screen. These are data programs that OJJDP has supported for many years, decades actually, and I'm really pleased. I cannot emphasize enough how important that kind of support has been, that we can really use these data to answer a lot of the questions that we have about youth in the system, and Dr. Gallagher in particular has been extremely supportive in the development of many of these, as well as many other organizations like NC National Center for Juvenile Justice. Just a little context. As hopefully everybody in this room is aware, crime is down, and juvenile crime in particular is down. So it's an important contextual thing. As we talk about crime, we need to remember that we are not talking about all kids in this country. This is a chart that we refer to as the brownie chart, basically as opposed to a pie chart. We kind of utilize this as a way of showing people exactly how many kids really are we talking about when we talk about the juvenile population. Is there really a juvenile violence crisis? And when you really look at something like this, this puts it into context. We are talking about a relatively small population of kids, but kids who have a really complex number of needs and difficult backgrounds. Again, I'm going to talk really very briefly and scratch the surface on some of the data we have on kids. Interestingly, as arrests have dropped, we haven't really seen that drop happen at the same rate when it comes to the juvenile court caseload. So I think what we really are seeing is that more cases over time have been handled formally. There's a lot of different reasons for this, which I'm not going to go into because that would take the rest of the time. But when you look at some of the characteristics, we know that about a quarter of those are girls, and about a quarter are minority youth, and these are cases referred to delinquency court caseload. Here is some information about probation, and this is new data. It's preliminary data that hasn't been publicly released, but I think it provides us with some good context. When you look at the total number of kids on any given day on probation in the U.S., we're talking about 500,000 kids. So that is, when you, at a community level, it's a large proportion, and that is the bulk of kids probably that we are talking about in terms of supervision, particularly when you compare them to those that are in custody. About a third are under age 16, so we're talking about a pretty proportional number that are relatively young, and 60% are minority. The largest number in terms of category for offense are for property offenses. That's not really a surprise, probably. The numbers when it comes to placement, and these are youth in custody, whether it's group homes or deep end correctional facilities, are about 81,000 on any given day in the U.S. Interestingly, as arrests have dropped, we haven't seen that drop happen quite as quickly for placement in terms of the rates. There's been a lag there. So that's sort of something I think that indicates to a more formal response in general. So now I'm going to talk really in a little more detail about youth in custody. And here we're talking about that daily count of about 81,000. The vast majority are boys, and that reflects, of course, what we also see in terms of the flow into the system. But we do see that girls' rates of arrest, for example, are not falling at the level that they are for boys. There's a large number of minority youth and a large proportion that are young, relatively young. Probably not a surprise that a large number are also in there, about a third, for person offenses, which tend to be the more serious cases. When we look at things like how long they've been in placement, over half have been in placement over 60 days. And in the juvenile justice system, that's a pretty long time. I mean, generally we don't see long sentences in JJ, so when we see something like that, I think it's something to kind of keep in mind. We also know that a large proportion are in relatively large facilities and are in locked facilities versus staff secure facilities, so facilities that actually have locks. The Survey of Youth in Residential Placement, which is another collection that we've supported, has also collected a lot of information from youth, and again, I'm just scratching the surface on these, and there is way more information available online. But when we look at some of the backgrounds of these kids, we know that there are some really important needs, particularly when you compare them to the general population of youth or other at-risk populations. A lot of them had to grow up pretty quickly. Many of them were taking care of their own family members. They did not have too many family members taking care of them, and many, at the time that they were taken into custody, were on their own. In other words, they did not have a family member, a parent, caring for them. We also know there's a lot of serious mental health issues. Almost 40% or 35% had recent suicidal thoughts or had reported a past suicide attempt. There's a lot, as I say, a lot more data, but this is just scratching the surface. We asked them a lot of questions about the experience that they had in custody, and as you can see, there is a proportion of kids in these facilities that are victimized or are as a threat of victimization. We also know that more than half have experienced by the facility some kind of coercive control, and that may have been appropriate or not, but that experience in itself can be rather traumatic, obviously, and so it's something to consider. This slide really gives us, I think, really highlights some of the issues regarding the difference between our general population of youth and youth who are in custody. The stuff that is in parentheses at the end of each one of these statements provides the rate for the overall juvenile population. And when you look at things like suspended or expelled or performing below grade level, and particularly learning disability, there is a dramatic difference between youth who are in custody and youth in the general population. So very much in sum, and again, I am really just scratching the surface, and when we get into you can get much deeper into learning more. One of the great things about having data is that we can learn about our detention population and about populations in certain facilities. But we do know, for example, and in some, that we're not talking about all kids. This is a manageable group of kids to work with, and we can target. Now that we have data, we understand way more about what's going on. They have a lot of challenging histories and a number of multiple needs, and for some of them, particularly when it comes to victimization, coming into the juvenile justice system has actually made those issues worse. In other cases, we know there have been appropriate responses. But obviously, one of the great things about juvenile justice is that it is an opportunity for intervention, and it was built for rehabilitative purposes. I'm going to leave the slide, really, the presentation with this. One of the things that kids were also asked in custody was what did they see their future like? And I think this is where the really hopeful information comes from. Most of these kids want to do well. Most of them don't expect to reoffend, and they want to move forward and have a steady job. They want to graduate from high school and move forward to go to college. And I think our challenge in using these data is to figure out how we can help them achieve this. There's a lot more information on our website. I always have to share that. So please do visit, and thank you very much.